You're listening to a Corridor Business Journal podcast.
It's time for straight talk about diversity, frank questions, honest answers, and real insights. It's Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, with your hosts Sadika Bodka of Nikkei Diversity Consulting and Anthony Arrington of Top Rank Professional and Executive Search Firm. Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, is a Corridor Business Journal podcast. On today's episode, Marcus Bullock, co-founder and CEO of Flick Shop. We're live at EntreFest 2021 at the Olympic Theater in the Nubo district of Cedar Rapids.
Green State Credit Union is proud to sponsor Diversity Straight Up. Established in 1938, Green State is Iowa's largest financial cooperative, serving nearly 250,000 members of all walks of life. Green State's products include checking accounts, loans, investments, insurance, commercial services, mortgages, and credit cards. Profits are returned to members in the form of better rates on deposits and loans. We encourage you to learn more at greenstate.org. Green State is federally insured by the NCUA and is an equal housing opportunity lender.
Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, is also sponsored by Alliant Energy. Entrepreneurs in the house, let's hear it for your hosts, Sadika Bodka and Anthony Arrington.
Welcome to a special episode of Diversity Straight Up, coming to you live from EntreFest 2021. So who's having a fabulous time here at EntreFest?
Been a good week. Good time.
I'm your host, Sadika Bodka.
And I'm Anthony Arrington. We're gonna have a good time here. We got a great guest. We're gonna have some great conversation, and we're gonna get real for a little bit here.
Yeah, so put your biases aside, strap on your seatbelt, and get ready for a wild ride on Diversity Straight Up. We're always keeping it real. But something's on my mind before we get to Marcus.
There's something on my mind.
It seems as if there have been many state laws that have been passed recently that is affecting diversity training that really impacts schools and universities as well as state agencies. And any type of curriculum that is revolved around racial oppression, sexism, critical race theory, etc., depending on which state laws there are, it could be any or all of them. And it's worrisome because it's very confusing. The laws can be very gray. And if it's confusing for us to be able to talk about some of these topics, then what is the schools and the universities going to do about it? Because we know that we need to engage in these critical dialogue, especially when you're thinking about race and sexism. Think about it. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, year after year after year, can you guess the top 2 complaints that are filed by people? Race
and sex.
And well, they call it sex, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
And about last year, 32% charges that were filed were race related, and then about 31% were sex related, followed by national origin, about 9%. So how can we bring those numbers down, knowing that those numbers actually are very, underreported because people fear retaliation? I know that with clients that I work with, I can foster safe spaces without blaming and shaming. Yet we still need to address these topics because, as you can see, they're being impacted, and it's going to the EEOC. This is the schools, this is the academia, and then it's going into what? The workforce.
Here's the challenge. If we're being brutally honest, I'm glad you brought that up, by the way. If we're being brutally honest, and I just speak from my perspective and my lens, it's an attack. I believe when you read the laws, particularly we can talk about the law in Iowa, HF 802. When you read the laws, it is, to me, an intent ability to suppress voices and suppress a dark history in our country. And until we can have that honest conversation about our dark history in our country, we're going to continue to have these challenges. And so what we've got is we've got people who are fearful to have this conversation, and fearful because it's a blame. Because we tell the truth about our dark history, suddenly somebody else is to blame for that, sitting in the audience or sitting next to you hearing that, when the object is never to point a finger at you, the person, right? It's to have the conversation about where the country has been and where we can go. And until we can get to a point where when people are able to have the conversation and say, it's not me, they're not pointing the finger at me, the person. They're pointing the finger at the history, and we need to be able to deal with that.
And that's why,
the challenge.
True, and that's why it's very important, and this is advice that I give, and when you work with any D&I consultants, facilitators, trainers, ensure that they have the credentials, they have the expertise, and the skill set to create safe spaces.
Yep.
Because guess what? Lived experience alone is not going to create that environment that's so needed.
Yep.
Because blame, shame, guess what? It's not going to get us anywhere. We need to look at addressing it, acknowledging it, and coming up with solutions to move forward.
Agreed.
But I know that, Marcus, you want to share something. So, Marcus, any thoughts you have on
We
this?
could go all day on that.
Yeah, no, I like to learn. I like to listen and learn. I mean, I think it's interesting to, I hear the conversations. I was talking to one of my son's teachers at his school. And she asked the question, Marcus, she asked to the room, how do you all feel about some of these conversations that are being had? And, because my son, he's 10 years old. And we have to be granular with the 10-year-old classroom. And bringing it to a level of granularity, the question we asked him, do you feel that we should continue, Marcus, Marcus Jr., do you think that we should continue to celebrate these holidays or these monuments or these statues that are aligned with some of our dark past? It's a very, very, granular way of introducing him to this conversation. And he's asking the questions like, I don't know, are there other people who are not celebrating that have a dark past? And the teacher was like, well, we don't know if we aren't celebrating those people. I thought it was a great question from him, and it made me think. He's like, well, the teacher said, we don't know those people, and we don't know how to celebrate. We wouldn't know how to celebrate those people as a country that are aligned with another dark past. And so I'm like, well, look, here's the thing. I come from the hood. I was born and raised in the hood, unapologetically. Two things here. One, I have to walk into every room, including this room yesterday, and I have to walk in there and say, hey, listen, before I even mention anything about the technologies that we're building, the solutions that we want to introduce to the country, I committed a carjacking. I did it. And although I got sentenced to 8 years for it, and I got sentenced to 8 years for it at 15 years old, I did it. And I have to acknowledge that. There's a sense of accountability that has to come with it. And the only way for me or anyone else that sat in that courtroom, the victim who was the victim of that carjacking, the family members of the victim who was a part of that carjacking, my mother, my grandmother, the invisible victims who we don't talk about that are victimized by the carjacking, there's no way for them to get through it until they get to the point where Marcus can walk into a room and unapologetically say, apologetically say, I did it. We have to acknowledge that first. The second thing I said in the classroom, which was a little awkward because I come from a neighborhood where I can tell you all the biggest dope dealers in my neighborhood, right? And I can tell you all about all the famous dope dealers across the country who got locked up. And because I'm from DC, one of the bigger ones was Rafael Admins. Rafael Admins, he was known for supplying the District of Columbia with over 65% of the cocaine that permeated across the district that led to the District of Columbia being the murder capital of the country during the era when he was selling drugs. Rafael Admins is celebrated inside of the neighborhoods I lived in. If I'm being honest, he's celebrated in those neighborhoods. Can you imagine having a Rafael Admins Day on the calendar? It sounds stupid, doesn't it? It sounds crazy acknowledging all of the catastrophe that has aligned with Rafael Admins, but there was so much gain from the people who worked under Rafael Admins' crew. They made a lot of money. They bought homes, they bought land and property and material possession and cars, and they made investments inside of wills and trust for their children to be able to continue to grow. There were people who went to colleges and universities that were, descendants of Rafael Admins and his family members. And they went on to live amazing lives as a result of the drugs that Rafael Admins sold early in the day. Those people are living incredible lives now, and ain't nobody knocking on their door and telling them they got to get their degree back now that Rafael Admins is locked up. But it would sound crazy if we said we want to celebrate that and put Rafael Admins Day on side of the calendar. Or any of the other hustlers like Bumpy Johnson or any of the other people that we probably can name we've seen movies about. But we're so comfortable with saying we acknowledge that there's a dark past and people that have done things that have allowed for a level of privilege from a lineage of the people who done those things, and yet we can't talk about that in the school simply because it hurts your feelings? Right. You bugging. You tripping. Nah, so yes, don't ask. I mean, my 10-year-old son is right. Marcus, yes. Marcus Jr., you're right. Who are those other people? Rafael Admins is one. Are we going to celebrate him? The teacher says no, we not going to celebrate him. It's crazy. So, yeah, we have to talk about the dark past of the others that don't mimic the people who look like me, who don't get celebrated because of the craziness that they did. We have to be able to acknowledge and build accountability into the lives of the people who lived in the earlier that's just my feelings about it. I'm like, that's a great segue. I'm glad you said that because you talked the other day in your keynote about storytelling. And this is kind of a segue into how you got into your business. And for our listeners some of you have heard the story about how you got into your business, but some of our listeners hadn't. But as you moved into your business, talk about some of your strains, some of your challenges being a black man trying to start a business.
And maybe you're starting a business.
Maybe you're challenge in itself.
Yeah, that's the challenge in itself. But you had an extra challenge coming out of a penal system, having to deal with those mental challenges. Can you talk about how you overcame those challenges that maybe others didn't have, and how that affects you as a businessman today? How that resolve affects your ability to continue forward today?
So let's go to the end of that question, which is how does my past impact or affect the businessman that I am today? Mm-hmm. So, like I told Mike that I was sitting in the corner here, so I'm gonna have a conversation with you and I'm gonna let everybody else, just easdrop in on this part of the conversation, right? If I'm being honest for real, my past it gave me a superpower in the business, in the role of the CEO today. And the reason why that's the case is because the barriers that most entrepreneurs, I don't care, you can black, white, it doesn't matter what nationality come from, where, it's just hard to run a business. I don't care, it may be a little bit more challenging to start a business and to continue to scale a business and build relationships that allow for your business to be able to grow and thrive. But nevertheless, I don't care what business you're running, it's just hard to run a business in general, right? Like you wake up tomorrow morning and it's just hard. You know what I mean? Like there's no one to tell me tomorrow morning what to do in order to be able to be successful. There's no direct deposit that's waiting on the other end of this goal unless I generate revenue for my company. And so we all suffer that. So there's some similarities across the board. But with that being said, I went to prison as a 15-year-old kid. And I stayed in prison for almost a decade. I grew up there. I went through puberty in prison, right? Like when everyone was getting driver's licenses and graduating and going to prom, and I was in prison calling home, making 15-minute, $18 collect calls to my mom and asking her to call my friends on three-way as I listened to them talk about how they were going on a senior trip. I went back to my cell and I cried because I knew how much of a failure I positioned myself to be because of a decision I made. And for years I had to deal with that, not a day or not 2 weeks or not 6 months, but 365 times I had to get up and I had to deal with that. And I had to do that 8 times. 8 years I had to deal with that. The level of resilience that I had to innately build internally to allow me to psychologically make it through that season of my life positioned me to come home. And when I'm starting my businesses,
When I'm working inside and there's all of these massive mountains that I have to climb in order to be able to solve problems, whether it be in my company or for my team or for my family members, the problems don't really seem that big. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I'm like, you know, it's not really a problem. And when I hear others talk about some of the issues that they have, you know, when we were fundraising, when we were first raising our first round of funding to bring in some venture capital, you know, we got told no so many times, but a lot of people get told no a bunch of times. And as I listen to some of my cohort members inside of some of the accelerators I was in, or when I go to colleges and universities and I talk to some of the students there that are a part of some of these programs, and they talk about having a door slammed in their face, you know, 10, 15, 20 times. In my head, I'm thinking like, so keep talking and tell me what the problem is. Because what did you think was gonna happen when you went out there to go start pitching your business? You thought that when you walked out there, everybody was gonna say yeah and write you a check the first time? Like, come on, you bugging. Right? Like, I don't wear a necktie to work every day.
Right.
And when, like, you know, if I'm writing or if I'm in interviews, I'll use the euphemistic words that allow me to be able to convey a thought that will help the audience identify in a way that is common to their way that they communicate, similar to the way they communicate. But in any other environment, I talk like I'm talking right now to you. And this is how I communicate on a very, very daily basis. I'm my authentic self, so unapologetically, I'm Marcus. And because of that, I get boxed out of opportunities, simply because I show up authentically me. And the resilience that I had as I went through prison now transfers here. And so I'm like, yeah, I mean, no problem is a really big problem. No problem. I mean, nothing compares. In comparison, some of my peers who, you know, graduated from HBS or Wharton or, you know, Oxford, like I'm blessed to be in these rooms now, and it's such a big deal when they have these issues. They're back into these corners and they're falling apart. They're crippling. Oh my gosh, I don't know how to solve this problem. And I'm like, that's a problem for you.
Yeah, well, Marcus, you know what it seems like? It seems as if, you know, you can have all the book smart, but you also have the street smart, that you have authentic leadership and you have resiliency to help overcome anything that's in your way. I think you said 41 times the doors were slammed in your face.
And I got up 41 times applying for jobs. The 42nd, I got the job yet.
Woohoo! 42nd is a good number then, huh?
I'm like, you know, it could have been 82nd, and I would have continued to keep going.
But that's the thing about the resiliency. You're going to keep on going.
Yeah.
I have a question when we're thinking about the workforce and we're looking at returning citizens. You have been on the other end trying to knock on the doors and ask for a job. What can you tell employers to help with any anxiety they may have about employing re-entry or returning citizens, based on your conversations you've had with others?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I struggle with that one as well, right? Because it's no red or blue pill. You know, I tell the same people, I'm like, you know, what's the reservations you have for somebody who just graduated from Howard University? Like, talk to me about the issues tell me what are some of the concerns you have for them, and I could probably mirror them with the people that come out of prison. Now, on the flip side of it, I could talk about some of the benefits of, you know, employing people that's coming out of prison. I mean, someone's coming out of prison I never thought I was going to be. Can you believe I'm in Cedar Rapids, Iowa?
Can you believe you're in Cedar Rapids?
I can't believe I'm in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Right? And the thing of it is right, you know, the people who are coming out of these cells, they're saying similarly, it doesn't matter what opportunity they get, almost all of them are almost an unbelievable accomplishment. Because for years, sometimes, in my situation, almost a decade, and others, decades, plural, we've been told you'll never be anything. When I walked into prison as a 15-year-old kid, the assistant warden walked to me. There were 7 of us walking into the reception center, and we had to take off all our clothes, and we were literally naked. And that was my first time I was completely naked around a bunch of other grown men. I'm a 15-year-old kid, and everyone else is like 30s and 40s. And I'm standing there, and I have no idea what to say, what to do. My hands are shaking. My hands are sweating. I don't know what to say. Like, nothing is happening that's normal that looked like what happened just a few weeks ago at Sutler High School, where I was going to school, right? And the assistant warden came in there with my body completely naked and me not even allowed to cover myself. I can't cover myself, right? If you cover yourself, the correctional officers will take you by both of your arms, slam you on the ground. They'll cuff you backwards with your hands to your ankles, and then you'll lay there until they get an opportunity to be able to take you into solitary confinement. While I sat there and I knew I couldn't cover myself with all of my body sticking out and everyone else standing right beside me, and he walked up and said, "You're in the big leagues now. Welcome to the big leagues. I wonder what's going to happen to you here. Oh, I heard you from D.C. You're in Virginia too? Oh, you know them Richmond boys don't like boys from D.C. Wonder what's going to happen to you." And he walked off. And as if I wasn't already fearful enough. And now I have to walk and deal with that. And so from that moment on, every other correctional officer, I mean, not everyone, but a lot of the correctional officers, the counselors, the wardens, the majors, like almost every adult that had a badge on their chest, they would tell me how much of a horrible person I was and how I would never do anything upon release. And so I already didn't think I was going to win, and most people don't. So when you have an opportunity to be able to go apply for a job, like I did, and you finally get that 40-second yes, you get that yes on that 40-second application, from the moment that assistant warden told me I would be nothing, to that moment that I got the job, I felt like it was a possibility that I would lose. From that point forward, I was like, oh my gosh, I have an opportunity here. What it created was a sense of loyalty to the employer. I was like, yo, you ain't never gotta worry about me going nowhere. I will mix paint for the rest of my life for you.
So Marcus, did you ever ask the employer why they took a chance on you when the other 41 did not?
No, I didn't have to. I knew I took a chance on it. And on a job application, they asked me, have you been convicted of a felony, within the last 7 years? I had served 8 years in prison. So I was able to say, no, I haven't been convicted of a felony within the last 7 years. The same Marcus from the first 41 applications was the same exact Marcus on the 42nd one, and I eventually became Employee of the Year and got promoted within 9 months to a sales rep managing the entire DC metro region, selling more paint to this day than anyone has ever sold in the company of Sherwin-Williams.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
And here's the thing, right? The reality of it is that I woke up every morning not wanting to accomplish the goal of saying I want to set or put my name on a wall with a record saying I sold more paint. The reality of it is that I just wanted to come home and win. I wanted to come home and prove to those correctional officers and that assistant warden that I was something more than the naked person that they saw when they sent me sitting on that bench when I got to Southampton Reception Center. I wanted to prove to my mom that I wasn't wasting all of her postage or all of the money that she sent to me to go on my commissary books or all of those collect calls that she accepted from me when I was sitting in prison. I wanted to prove to my sister that I was as smart as the person who talked about the books that I read and the letters that I wrote her. I wanted to prove to my grandmother that she wouldn't die and leave this earth with the last memory of her grandson having inmate number 247384. And the 600,000 people that are coming home from prison every day simply want to be able to check those boxes in their own lives. And so as employers, think about the possibility of bringing on people that just simply want to come home and win, let alone help you drive your revenues. I mean, Sherwin-Williams stock is doing really, really, really well right now, you know? And, you know, not only did I help contribute to that, but I just wanted to be able to make my mama proud.
Yeah.
Alliant Energy is a place where I can create the future, where my skills, creativity, and new ideas make a better tomorrow. I help deliver the energy powering moments that matter to you. It's where we care about the environment and our neighbors, a place where my talents and skills grow. My job isn't a job, it's my passion, my place, my purpose, because I am energy. See how you can put your energy to work at alliantenergy.com/careers.
You come from nothing to getting $250,000 investments from Boeing. John Legend is having conversations with you. And you just mentioned you like to prove all these people wrong. Do you ever think about some of the individuals in your life that you wanted to do business with that maybe turned their back on you? And maybe you do business with them today, or maybe they're knocking on your door today. Are you experiencing that, and how does that feel? Because you've proven them all wrong. How does that feel?
I mean, the honest, I'm always caught in between this place where it's interesting that, you know, I come from a place where, I mean, I did have a felony. I have a felony in my record. And the majority of I would venture to say that the majority of people in this room today have never met a Marcus before. Right? Right? Yes? Right?
Well, you're only one Marcus, so yes.
That too, right? But a lot of the nameless faces that will appear on your social media feeds, on the media, they're a replica of a Marcus with a different last name, right? And what I tell them, I'm like, Marcus, man, look, dude, you're approaching people and you're asking them for, you know, initially it was jobs. Now I'm asking for venture capital. I'm looking for social capital to allow me to create the introductions that will help me land relationships like the relationship that we landed with Boeing and Slack and Facebook and Apple. And it's a blessing to be able to have that. But when I think about the people that work in these HR departments, they've never met a Marcus before. The people that work in the corporate social responsibility departments, they've never met a Marcus before. They haven't come from neighborhoods or communities where they had cousins or uncles or brothers or sons in their families that have been relegated to the corners and the shadows of their neighborhoods and unfortunately end up on a defense table where they end up getting sentenced to 8 years as 15-year-old kids for stealing a car. Because the people in their families, if they would have gotten caught for stealing a car, they would have got probation. I met them. One of the 16-year-old, my co-defendant was 16, we went in a cell together. One of the 18-year-olds that were in the holding cell with me when I was getting sentenced, there was a home invasion, and his gun actually accidentally discharged and shot the lady in the leg. He got house arrest. And he just didn't look like me. Same judge, I went in front of that judge, I was 15 years old and I stole a car from someone and no one got hurt. And I got sentenced to, by the way, I served 8 years. I got sentenced to 23 years to life for stealing a car, right? And when you think about what that means, like that guy, that 18-year-old, his family members, you know what they did? They went out and said, you know what? Make sure, let's take the gun out of the house and make sure you don't use it anymore. And they went on about their life, and who knows what he went on to go do, right? I mean, that's the reality of the situation of the people who run those CSR departments. That was their son, that was their uncle, that was their brother, right? And so, because I realized that, I'm like, Marcus, you have a responsibility to be able to not go into these conversations with malice in you. You can't go in with all of the frustration and anger that was baked into your life as a result of witnessing this time and time again. If you actually want to see change, Marcus, what you have to do now is walk into these same rooms and tell the story and be a person and be a human. And if you humanize your own journey, take accountability for it, and introduce people to the way that the culture of what was happening in my community when I was growing up, then I believe, and if I do my job right, then I will create the level of empathy that will allow for them to be able to hopefully see the next Marcus that comes behind me in a different way.
Right.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that how you engage with someone, it is going to stick in their mind. And if we're able to create positive interactions, then it's going to allow positive interactions with someone else that may be in a similar situation as you. Looking at the mass incarceration, well, first of all, the inequities, I mean, they were blatant in your face. You just saw that with a fellow cellmate.
Yeah.
That has to be very hard to be able to stomach something like that. Yet you said there's no malice in terms of you wanted to be able to impact change. So
it was hard. It's hard now looking back in hindsight. At the time, I thought that the judge was going to remember his case and then see my case, like, oh, you know what, we made a mistake. That just didn't happen. So at the time, I wasn't upset or angry. It's in 2020, in hindsight, where I'm like, dude, how you gonna let this man go? But, you know.
Yes.
So with the high levels of mass incarceration that we're experiencing here in the US compared to any other parts of the world, you're about justice reform. You've seen what's happening the inside of the prison that you were in. What do you think needs to happen? What do you think, if you had a magic wand, next two things that is really going to be critical to make some changes in the systemic institutions here?
Yeah, so one of them I'm really proud of. I sit on the board at the Justice Policy Institute, and we worked on an academic research paper
along with a bunch of legislators in DC. It's one of the benefits of living in DC, right? Like I can walk up the street and I'm on a hill. Yeah. And we were able to work with some of them, and we launched the First Step Act. And since then, we've also partnered with the White House to be able to introduce the Second Step Act. The First Step Act, giving opportunities to people that are coming home from prison and help create second chances. Second Step Act, giving employment opportunities to folks and bringing equity to this to HR practices. So that was one of the places, as I think about like reentry, what reentry looks like. In my own personal life, I feel like no child should be in adult prison. And so we wanted to be able to help pass legislation to prevent kids from going into prison. And we successfully did that in 48 states. So I'm excited about that. That's great.
Wow.
Which means we're keeping kids out of prison.
What age range is that?
Anything under the age of 18 in most states, and up to some states like Connecticut, where it goes up to 20, I think up to 25, I believe. No, 23. There's some other, you talking about justice reform. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with the wrong penal system, right?
Yes.
But I'm an advocate of eradicating solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is tough. I sat in solitary confinement and literally talked to myself inside of a scratched up aluminum foil mirror that was above a toilet that was connected to my sink inside of a room that was 6 by 9 for days and days on end, and I hadn't even turned 16 yet. And that can do something to you psychologically, right? I mean, it's interesting, we toy around with the idea of being on lockdown as a result of this pandemic that we just experienced, and people are like, yo, it's tough. My mental health has been completely disrupted as a result of having to be in a house and look at the same 4 walls and look at my same family members for an entire year without being able to interact and engage in other places, especially with our children. And we had these conversations and we toy around with it, but we advocate to put people inside of these isolated rooms that are much smaller than your house and without your nice refrigerator and all the things you have inside of it. And we're like, yo, nah, definitely lock them up and throw away the key. And so, I try to advocate for eliminating solitary confinement. But that list goes on, and we just don't have enough time to talk about it.
Oh, well, I know that we can definitely talk a lot more about that and your life story, which is very inspirational. But now we're going to change the segment up here.
What's on our listeners' minds?
Ready to take some questions from audience members. Any questions, comments? Yes.
Like, this is the safe space, so before we go into Q&A, I want you to be, like, this is the opportunity to ask the most uncomfortable questions. The questions where you're like, you know what, I don't even know if this is insulting, Marcus, but it's been on my mind. It won't be insulting to me. I want this to become the safe space. I want this to be able to be the environment or the room where we feel super comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where real change happens. Yes. That's what allows us to be able to take this conversation back into our own homes, our own Facebook pages or Instagram pages or Twitter, and be able to really create a conversation that erects change. So
yes.
I'm grateful for it.
Yes,
that's what diversity
absolutely.
straight up is for.
We're always keeping it real. So
Yes.
as you're thinking about your own equity, diversity, inclusion, and engagement journey, what questions do you have?
You talk about talking openly with your son regarding, race and bias and, a world that he has to grow up in. As a white female, I was wondering when at trying to educating my parents last summer with George Floyd, and educating myself because I obviously did not know a lot of what was happening. I didn't really realize white privilege until last summer, very embarrassingly. So when I have children, I really want to know, how do you approach that with children? Because I would love to start as early as possible without terrifying them, but also because I want to raise good children who understand their privileges and everything else. I still have a lot to learn, but how do you approach that with young kids?
Great question. We'll just repeat it. I'm going to paraphrase it. How do you have conversations with your child or young children about race?
Yes.
Thank you so much for being brave and for asking a question that
so
is on a
grateful
lot
for
of
you.
people's
It's at least
mind.
20 people in this room that want to ask that same exact question.
Yes.
Yep.
Kudos.
I promise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now So I can give a few thoughts. I think it's important that it's okay to be honest with our children. You know, it's funny, when I was growing up, I used to hear stories about farm kids, how hard they worked, right? They got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, they worked till 9 o'clock, then they went to school, and they worked till 5 o'clock, then they get home and worked till 9 o'clock at night, and that was hard, right? It was hard. So my question is, if we already know what it's like to live hard lives. We're already teaching our kids, even in rural communities and urban communities, to understand hard things in life. And my belief is it's okay to have challenging conversations with children in safe spaces, because you have no idea how smart they really are, right? I think we take the intelligence of our kids for granted, and it's important to understand that there's opportunities to have those conversations. So it's really about not being afraid, finding that time. You don't have a conversation with your kid in front of their friends. You know, maybe you're not embarrassing them, but you're having a conversation at home. But there's nothing wrong with having conversations, I think, that we perceive as challenging, and more often than not, it's probably more challenging for us than it is for the kids.
So Anthony, you raised biracial children.
I
so
did.
How did you have race relation conversations with them?
You know, I had there were times that I did not have conversations with my kids. I allowed them to learn their own lives and ask questions. And then I was able to take a question and turn it into a story. Take a question and turn it into a conversation. But my kids are fortunate enough that I was able to raise them in an environment where they're able to see all types of culture. And I pushed that. And it was important that I did that, living in a biracial family.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
So my children are born here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I was born in India. And my daughter came home one day, I think a couple of years ago, and she's like, "Mom, your skin color is lighter than mine. How come mine's darker?" So we had conversation about skin, and she said, "I don't see color." It's a very beautiful thing, because she says, "I just want to look at somebody as a human." So she was saying that around her friend circle, she never thinks about their color of skin. And I said, "Well, honey, what if that individual is really proud of who they are in terms of their skin?" And so I have these conversations in terms of where is someone on their cultural competency. And she's in a place where she's minimizing differences. Or no, she's elevating similarities. And so it's that journey. And then she's like, "Well, I identify as an American, not as an Indian." So we had another conversation. I said, "That's a good thing. These labels, people put us in labels, they put you in a label. How do you feel? How do you identify? And I need to be respectful of that as well." And so we've had, and I said, the other thing is I said, race relations, I said, guess what? Race is something that we created as human beings. It's a social construct. And she's like, "Oh." And so that's how we're just having authentic conversation. They're young. Guess what? They were born with technology. They go to the refrigerator with a laptop. Guess what? They're really connected with what is going on in this world. When it comes to diversity, they get it. For me, I think about the younger generations, it's really equity, inclusion, and engagement in the social media. But diversity is something that they are going to be embracing a lot more than some of the other generations that we have here.
Did that answer
great
your
questions.
question? Great question.
Yes.
Yeah, that was.
Yes, we got another? Go ahead.
You know, that was a great question. And again, I just want to pause to say thank you. Like, seriously, I do have to thank you, because, again, I mean, there are a ton of people in this room. There are people online, and we all struggle with it, right? It doesn't matter what color you are, what neighborhood you live in, your social economic status. We all struggle with it. We all struggle with it. I have to have the conversation with my son. Like, it's unfortunate, but like the neighborhood that we, I was talking to someone about this earlier this morning, the neighborhood that my wife and I work so hard to live in the neighborhood we live in. And I have to tell my son, because of the neighborhood we live in, you can't walk to the basketball court by yourself. You can't. I'm so sorry. Now, if we lived in a neighborhood that I grew up in, I would let you go and walk to the basketball court, and you safe. You all right. And we work so hard to be in this neighborhood, and you would think that we would be way more safe, but you aren't safe in this neighborhood. You can't do that. And that's a hard conversation for me to have with my 10-year-old son, telling him he can't walk to the basketball court by himself. And what it does is it spawns a conversation that I honestly don't even want to have. Yeah. I don't even want to have. I don't even want to tell him the reason, the fears that I have or the apprehension that I have as a result, because then it creates this snowball. And what I also don't want is I don't want him walking around a world with a big ball of hate as a result of how I articulate what has happened in the past to others that look like him, that have tried to go to the basketball court by themselves but didn't come home that same night. Right? That's challenging because I don't want him to walk around, because the other thing that my son has to deal with as a result of my success, the rooms that we're in, we're typically the only ones that look like we're in the room. Some of my closest friends are my white friends, and I have to tell him, I'm like, yo, bro, like, this really is my, like, and I have to articulate to him because he's like, I don't understand, because when we're at family dinner, and I'm being transparent, very transparent, we're at family dinner with all of my sisters and my aunts and my uncle, you know, everyone in the room looks like me. And the conversations that we have, the frustration that we see when we turn on the news and you see somebody else, it's like, golly, you know what I mean? He's sitting in, he's absorbing that. He's learning in that moment. And so it's creating something, it's crafting something that I don't even want to see in him. And so it's a struggle for us all to have these kinds of conversations. So for that, I just want to say thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right, we got one more question, and then we got another segment, a fun segment. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your panel today. Again, thank you for your story. My question is about the larger community, and we see corporations now bringing people onto their boards, almost forced to do that by the SEC and some other organizations. We see diversity and inclusion officers, big splashy publications rolling out that these things are happening. We see efforts at the city, community, at the state level to make sure that we're doing things for diversity. What successes have you seen? How do you hold people accountable for these actions to make real change and not just press releases?
I'm glad you
Wow.
take that first.
Go for it, and then
Something just hit me, just an idea. I'm going to coin this, so if you hear it somewhere else, I just thought about it like right now.
I'm tweeting it later.
Tweet it later. But I think it's a great thing that we're having these discussions post George Floyd, and corporations are putting out statements and doing things. But I like what I call married to the moment. So how I judge organizations is a couple of ways. One is, are you married to the moment? So we're married today, but in 6 months when George is not, we're not thinking about George, what are you really doing? Did you just do a training today? Did you just do a statement? What's going on in your company? And number two is, what's your budget say? Right?
Exactly.
So we can have a lot of conversations, but what's the purse? When we open the purse, where's the money going? And that's not money to me or to Sedeca or to Marcus. It's investing in the cause, in your people. And so there's a lot of organizations that have done great things and are putting out great statements, and that's wonderful. My judge is, what are you doing at the purse? And are you married to the moment? Because we can talk about it today, but when I see you in 6 months or when I see you in 12 months, are you as excited about that issue today as you are 12 months? And what does your pocketbook say in your company?
That's really my point, because in 12 months, where is that accountability of people standing up and going, this is what you said, this is what you did, this is the result, which didn't make it to where you're going, and we don't do that part.
Right.
And so as a community, what successes have you seen where people have been able to affect that and hold people accountable and not just roll something out, hey, we're going to Band-Aid this with a statement and nothing happens, and you continue to have these problems. Yep. You should never take what you had to go through to make change. We shouldn't be outraged about George Floyd because it happened. We should be outraged that it was a possibility. Yeah. And so,
So interesting when you say that, because I completely agree.
Yeah, great point.
I was on at one of the sessions earlier, and I know that there are laws that have been, as I said, being passed in certain states. And this session was from someone from Missouri, and their laws are a lot more friendlier because of the Ferguson incident. So their state communities further advanced. I said, well, I don't want what happened in Ferguson or what happened in Minneapolis to happen in Iowa or any other state for us to impact change. I don't want that. I don't want my diversity business to be, going gangbuster on the murder of someone. I don't want that. To me, that's not a good feeling. Your question about how do you measure success, I think that for best practices, what I see with organizations, when you have a commitment from the leadership, support is part of their strategic plan, they allocate money, resources, and it's not just the chief diversity officer's role. It is a role of every individual on the board and every individual on the leadership as part of their performance, and you're driving it throughout the organization, and you have a strategic plan around equity, diversity, inclusion, and engagement that's tied to your overarching strategic plan that creates an agile roadmap for you to go on this journey with measurable outcomes. And I'm not talking about how many number of trainings you've done. Based on the training, what are you trying to impact change? That's the key, measure those outcomes. More importantly, don't give up. Guess what? You're going to fail. Yes, I said it. I'm going to fail. Why? Because we're humans. We make mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes. Have that growth mindset. And when something happens, stop, assess, course correct, but keep on going. And guess what? It's not going to happen overnight. Changes are not going to happen overnight. It may take 5 years, it may take 10 years. Remember that. We celebrate the small wins. But I think that's what success for me looks like.
Right. Purchasing power, I know we got another segment, but to real quick to kind of wrap up, put a bow around what can you do to hold people accountable. In your situations where you're at, if you feel the place of business or the organization that you're working with does not align with your values, then you have a choice.
Yep.
And your choice is, am I going to stay in this organization? Or am I going to use my voice in this organization to ask for change? Or am I going to leave? In your community, you have a choice. From a policy standpoint, you all have a choice. You have your vote. I never knew how valuable it was to vote locally until maybe 10 years ago. I want to kick myself that I wasn't a local voter. And I don't care what party, what political, where you come from, your vote for your causes matter. And so that's how you hold people accountable. You leave your job if you're not happy and you go work somewhere else. And I can tell you a long story about Victoria's Secret. My daughter's a fashion model, and I can tell you a long story about their trajectory and what's happened to them because they didn't focus on their customer base. Another long story, but I just wanted to wrap you up. Voice and ability to walk away.
Yes.
30 seconds. I promise.
30 seconds.
I promise. You can put me on the time. I promise. 30 seconds. What you're describing is emotional activism. You'll see it on TV, you feel bad, and you want to do something about it. Once as that emotion is lingering, you feel committed to the cause. As the conversation dwindles, so does the emotion. That's emotional activism, and it has to stop. The solution, that's what I want to identify and put a name on it so you can call it what it is. The solution, bring people like me. So like one, what is the economic infrastructure of what it is, how you're solving this problem? Where's the bread land? Where's the money landing? And who are you bringing in at the executive leadership levels that look like me that will help you tie it back to the mission overall to the community? Because I promise you, if it's a board full of middle-aged white men that are making this kind of decision to increase their D&I, what you think was going to happen 6 months from now? Because they're walking with a level of privilege, but they don't have to have that kind of issues, right? But if you bring me into the boardroom, I promise you, I'm gonna get on your nerves every Monday morning. I'm like, all right, so look, let's go back. I know we're working on that, but let's go back to this. We said that we want to allocate funding to this problem. And I think that the people that's closest to the problem are the closest to the solutions.
Yep. All right, so this is a fun part of the...
I'm excited about this. You guys holding balls in your hand.
Well, I hope EntreFest and this place has a liability. Thank goodness it's a softball. I'm not good at throwing balls here, but these are softballs, a diversity thumb ball. We'd love to have a couple volunteers if you want to join in on this fun game. If you want to join in, please come to the front. It'll be easier to kind of toss it to you, so come on up.
So these balls, you want to explain them?
Yeah, so there's prompts and questions on these diversity thumb balls. These are great icebreakers. So what we do is, first of all, it's a safe space to be able to have conversations, reserve judgment, and just authentically respond to the question or the prompt that your hand lands on when we throw it to you, okay? So if Anthony throws it to me, wherever my thumb lands, read out the prompt or question, and then please share, okay?
I love this.
So I think we have, I'm
two
going
people?
to step out, and because we're going to allow our participants to go.
Sounds good.
So do you want to, why don't you do the honors and throw it out to the audience here? Whoever wants to, we have, I think, maybe 2, 3.
Let's do it.
All right.
Ready?
My name's Troy. So I've got describe the messages you received about race when you were growing up. I grew up in a small Iowa farming community, and as I got older, I realized just kind of people talking around that there aren't blacks in my community because the community drove them out anytime they came in. And for me, it started opening my eyes to I had no idea. And it's a shameful past, as much as the United States has, whether it's 100 years ago or 200 or in the past 30 years. So that was like this silent message that I grew up through and didn't even know and had to be told later on, and then reflecting on it, I realized the impact of it on one small Iowa community.
What's your name again?
Troy Miller.
Troy, thanks for that.
Troy, thank you
Troy.
so much. And just for you participating,
Keep the ball.
you can keep the diversity
Keep the ball.
phone.
Take it to work,
Winning.
Troy.
Yeah, winning. Always about it here.
Thank you for that. All right, so ready for the next one?
Yes.
You want me to throw it?
Liability, Anthony, liability.
So my name is Skylar, and I got a time you went out of your way to make someone feel included. So, as a volunteer service dog trainer, I am aware of some of the unique challenges that those that require service dogs have. So anytime I see someone with the service dog, whether I have my foster with me or not, I always make sure to go out of my way to ignore the dog, because I know that can cause some issues or unwanted attention. So.
That's great.
Wow.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
My daughter just got
Thank
a
you.
service dog. She travels with the little poodle. She's helps with stress, so she travels with it. Really enjoys her dog. I'm mad she's leaving Sunday, and I don't want her to take the dog home.
Well, you are such an inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep the
Thank
ball.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to toss in whoever gets it.
Thank you for that. My name is Mike Colbert. I have, how might you personally combat prejudice and discrimination? Something that my wife actually recently talked about. She's a part of the knitting community. I don't know if we have any knitters, but they actually became quite involved in being activists. And one of the things that she shared with me is stand in the gap. So wherever you are, if you see something going on and you're not okay with it, stand in the gap. And that's all I have to say.
I like that. Stand in the gap.
I
like that.
I need that. Thank you.
I have my pen with you.
Well, what an inspirational show this has been. Thank you so much for being part of this. Marcus, I don't know how else we can thank you. We appreciate your story and journey, and for really helping to drive equity, diversity, inclusion, and engagement. And thank you to EntreFest. And we also want to give a special shout out to our sponsors of Diversity Straight Up.
Green State Credit Union, we appreciate you. The City of Cedar Rapids.
Alliant Energy.
We really appreciate
and
our
Collins
sponsors.
Aerospace. And special thanks to those that have joining in virtually, and to all of our listeners who are going to hear this recording afterwards. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please send it to info@diversitystraightup.com. And if you like this show, if you feel that we need to continue to do it, season 2, by Corridor Business Journal, please subscribe, please share, please like, please love us.
Absolutely.
That'll help for us to continue to do the work that we're doing. As we always say, we're bubbling out of Iowa, going global. So please help us through that.
Wherever you live, work, and play, just realize, that diversity is in your backyard and have a conversation about it. Like we always say, diversity straight up.
Keeping it real.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you to our listeners, as we wouldn't be here without your support. Help us grow our subscriber base by sharing our show with others.
Love this new episode of Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union? Then head over to the most popular podcast audio platforms to describe, rate, and review us. And check out our other episodes while you're there.
Catch us on our next episode, which drops monthly.
We'd love to hear from you. Hit us up and send your questions, comments, and suggestions to info@diversitystraightup.com.
Remember, wherever you live, work, and play, our backyards are increasingly global. It's not enough to simply be a leader. Be a global leader by leveraging diversity with equity, inclusion, and engagement. And share your journey. This may empower others to be bold change agents. Be courageous, be authentic, be vulnerable.
Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union.
Keeping it real.